Hello and welcome back to Fuel for Thought, our weekly look at all things energy related and beyond. Scott Squires, pleased as always to be joined by the insider Dan McTagg. And Dan, a laundry list of things to talk about today. But first things first, as we record this, what's happening with prices at the gas stations, at the fuel pumps, in the Atlantic region certainly, but right across the country? What are you seeing? I know here in this region, it's been an upward trend the last few weeks. It's nudging now up towards $1.70 a liter. But what's happening this week?
Yeah, we're going to see more of the same, Scott. As I mentioned last week, expect another increase, and that's exactly what's happened in Newfoundland, up a little over than 2 cents a liter for gasoline, and up over 6 cents a liter for diesel and home heating fuel. The same will happen, obviously, for PEI, for New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. And while some of the regulatory bodies and bureaucrats tend to try to pretend that they don't have to listen to the market or they can choose different formula, the reality is that these prices are going up, reflecting a couple of things. One, the dynamic of demand. Colder weather means higher prices for diesel and heating oil and distillates, and of course the whole family of distillates, which includes jet fuel as well. But gasoline is in for the ride, and although that was last week, we've seen a bit of a tapering off this week, mostly due to geopolitical, looking at what Trump is saying now that he is president as of Monday, making comments about the fact that he's going to create an energy superpower, the likes of which America and the world have never seen. While Canada, and we'll talk about that later perhaps, while Canada sits back as a bunch of thumb-sucking dolts, pretending that they can use the energy, oil and gas in terms of the tariff problem that might be coming to us on February 1st. While having worked overtime to kill the oil and gas industry. I think it's a little hypocritical, obviously, for the NDP, Liberals, and others to now say we can use that as a trump card while they've been doing everything they can to kill our energy sector, while the Americans and the rest of the world are saying, bye-bye, Canada. And by the way, for people who think there's no big deal, think about it next time you cash your welfare checks, because there's no money left. We have a $62 billion deficit, and it's getting worse.
And it's interesting, Dan, this segues me into a post that I saw earlier. And I find it interesting a lot of times when many Canadians say, well, what happens in the States? So it doesn't affect us. We're our own country. We can do our own thing, which is true to an extent. But we know, as goes the United States quite often, so goes Canada. And we're talking about energy and the natural resources that Canada has. Leads me to President Donald Trump from the US speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos, saying the United States has the largest amount of oil and gas on any country on earth. Well, that can be debatable, but they're up there. And we're going to use it. Again, this is coming from President Donald Trump. He went on to say, not only will this reduce the cost of virtually all goods and services, it will make the United States a manufacturing superpower. And again, that's Donald Trump speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos. And Dan, yes, this is the United States. This is an American president, a U.S. policy. But how do you see this affecting what's happening in Canada? And how does that kind of juxtaposition against what Canada is doing in regards to its natural resources and energy?
Well, for a generation now, I have talked about the need for affordable energy in Canada. Those who disbelieved this a few years ago are now real believers. People know there's something wrong. It all began with ignoring the simple basics. If you mess around, you muck around, you create an incentive to drive up the price of energy, you disincentivize the economy from being viable and successful. And in this country, we have trampled on the ability for the energy sector to provide us something that we all have taken for granted for quite some time, not only managing a very cold climate, an energy intensive country, but also a country which depended very much on cheaper forms of energy in order to compete internationally, while at the same time offering that energy to the rest of the world. We have taken that and we have blown it up under Justin Trudeau, and yes, Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland and that gang, who basically said energy doesn't matter. As if we can live in a country like this in the midst of January, relying on windmills and solar panels and things like that. I say that because you either have to be really daft or have a couple of lumps on your head to actually think that you can live in an environment where you can denigrate the sources of energy, the blessing that we have in this country, which, by the way, has more provable reserves than the United States. But what I think Trump is saying here, and it's important, he's going to stop this business of limiting the ability for the United States to drill, baby, drill, or as it were, to frack gas. I think he'll be successful in some part, but the United States cannot do what Canada does. It needs heavy oil in order to operate its machinery. If you want your manufacturing to work, yes, you can get some natural gas. Yes, you can get some fracked gasoline, but it's important, I think, for Canadians here to understand one simple fact. American tight, light shale oil does not produce heavy diesel. It does not, therefore, allow you to run your transportation sector, planes, trains, automobiles, heavy equipment. It doesn't allow you to do mining, forestry. You need diesel for that. To do that, you need heavier slates of oil, which Canada has, and has plenty of it. We sell 4.4 million barrels every day to the United States. If the United States is going to go on a manufacturing tear and see its economy take off, as Trump is suggesting, it can't be done without Canada. And so for that reason, not to be harmonized with what Trump is saying, but to recognize that energy affordability, energy availability is absolutely indispensable for a country like Canada. And any politician, especially my old Liberal Party, from the Trudeau, his cabinet, his MPs, or his future aspirants like Mark Carney, more willing to go around and say, not only are we going to block pipelines and invest it in other countries, but we're also going to stop investments into energy sector. Remember what Mark Carney did. This is about Mark Carney. Mark Carney created an organization called GFANZ, Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, basically squeezing any type of investments capital that the oil and gas sector would need. No other sector, just oil and gas, would need to be able to finance the growth of its industry to be able to create prosperity for the rest of Canadians. He wanted to strangle that. He tried it in the United States and it worked for a while until the U.S. Department of Justice came in and said, that's a cartel. Do you want to be subject to antitrust legislation? Because we have a record for taking on, some pretty big organizations, including the Rockefellers, who we brought to his knees and smashed his organization to pieces. We'll do the same to you, Mark Carney. But here in Canada, yeah, it's okay. We like Mark Carney. I say that because that's a kind of nonsense that I hear from people. What they're doing, you're pulling the rug literally from under your ability to make ends meet. I have one plea to the Canadians: smarten the hell up.
And Dan, you're mentioning Mark Carney, who by all accounts is the front runner and will more than likely, anything can happen, but it looks like he will become the leader of the Liberal Party and by that measure, the Prime Minister of Canada, however long or short-lived that may be. And how frightening should it be to Canadians who want to move forward and who want to take advantage of all of our natural resources when Stéphane Guilbeault has just come out and said that he loves what Mark Carney is planning for an alternative to the carbon tax. He loves his plan, and he's given his full endorsement. What should that mean to Canadians who want to move forward from the last 10 years?
Well, Canadians are aware of these grifters. Guilbeault, capital cycle. Guilbeault, the socialist. Guilbeault, the 15-minute city guy. Guilbeault, the guy who wants everybody to drive electric vehicles in cold weather like we have today. Guy who doesn't have a problem spending billions of dollars of money we don't have. Same group that is supporting Mark Carney isn't just the World Economic Forum and all the trendies who failed the economies of Western Europe, and of course Canada, and up to now the United States. They've also, these are the Katie Telfords, the Gerald Buttses. These are a coterie of individuals who believe that they can use the weather agenda to be able to drive their candidate to do further harm to Canada. And I say, with absolute respect, Canadians need to wake up. If they don't like what's happened to their country in the past 10 years, they're going to hate what Mark Carney has, because he's Justin Trudeau 2.0. And if you think you can afford to live your life relatively in relative prosperity and have something for your children, think again. Mark Carney and the liberal cult is going to destroy this country in a way we have never seen. And you know what? It won't take Donald Trump to push us over the edge. It'll take people like Mark Carney, who have a reputation and have done so much to undermine our Canadian enterprise, not just, of course, manufacturing, but the energy sector. This man has an agenda which is completely anti-Canadian, and anybody who does not realize that is either ignorant or themselves very much opposed to maintaining the standard of living that every Canadian deserves to enjoy.
And I would encourage folks who may be listening to this and saying, gosh, that seems to be awful harsh towards Mark Carney, spend a little time and do a little research and look
Yes.
up into who this individual is and what his beliefs are, and maybe you'll form your own opinion. And that brings me to a question that I asked you a couple of weeks ago, Dan. And at that time, you seemed to think that a couple of things would have to happen that seemed pretty unlikely. And that question was, would it be possible for the Liberal Party, and if Mark Carney becomes leader, to extend an election and go the full mandate into October of the fall? A couple of weeks ago, when I asked you, you thought, well, that's probably not likely, especially if the NDP gain a backbone and stand up and do what they say they're going to do. So I'll ask you the same question now, Dan, on the 23rd of January, 2025. What likelihood, give it a percentage, give it whatever you want, but what's the likelihood that we may not be going to the polls in a couple of months and it could be the full mandate for the Liberals?
The Liberals don't want to hear what the public has to say. They don't want to go to an election. And they don't want to have any accountability in Parliament. Therefore, they've suspended it after not being able to function for 6 months and refuse an order by the Speaker of the House to produce documents on their green slush fund. That's just one of many examples of corruption and misbehavior by a government that should have long ago been gone. But what I think is going to happen, Mark Carney, Gerald Butts, Katie Telford are working overtime to try to convince some NDP members to stay with their coalition so that they can survive a vote of confidence. Now, that gets them to next October. My sense is that they're going to use the false flag, the pretext, and we've seen this many times in history, of the Trump tariffs as an excuse for holding Parliament out for yet another year after that. So you'll have, in effect, no government, but a government that is running by diktat and authoritarianism on executive authority only, with no accountability, no democratic accountability for the next year. That could be a situation. I want to raise it here now because it's likely that they cannot win the popular support. I don't care what pollster comes out with some garbage that they have been funded by Katie Telford or others to produce. The reality is that this government and its coalition NDP are done. They are going to be wind up in the wastebasket the longer they stay in this position. And it doesn't matter how cute and how smart people think Mark Carney is. The reality is Mr. Carney is an extremely devious man who has done a lot of damage to the Canadian economy and has basically said no to Canadian pipelines, but yes, we'll invest in pipelines in Brazil, and yes, we'll invest in the Middle East, but we will strangulate the Canadian economy by going after the sector. And by the way, with Guilbeault on his side, we have an emissions cap, which is only designated against the oil and gas sector. And guess what that does? No cost and benefit analysis that they promised. Fraudulently, what the federal government and its actors under Guilbeault and their socialist friends have done is try to say, we're going to impose emissions caps on an industry that no other country in the world would dare do, and the effect of which will be to diminish the most important economic generator that this country has. And I know people don't like to hear about it, but without oil and gas, shut your hospitals down, shut your pensions down, no universal basic income, no anything right now, because 1/3 of your 30 billion bucks a year, which goes into federal, provincial, municipal coffers, would simply dry up. I want to alert Canadians to the fact that this is what these cynics and what these actors are trying to do. They're trying to diminish the country. They're trying to destroy its democracy and destroy you and I, because after all, we are, according to them, just a post-national state under the guise and the tutelage of the World Economic Forum and UN.
So much to dig into and to monitor over the coming weeks and months, Dan. And I want to ask you about something else and someone else, and that's Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. And she kind of ties into everything that we've been talking about. She's really been front and center. She's been out appearing on Canadian television, on American television. She's been meeting with governors and U.S. government representatives. She met with incoming president then, Donald Trump, down at Mar-a-Lago. And there's been a lot of stuff, to use that term, a loose term, floating around about Alberta Premier Danielle Smith on social media about whether what she's doing is good. Some saying that she's anti-Canadian, some saying that she wants to put Alberta first. She wants to join the United States as a state. All of these things. Dan, again, using your expertise and what you see, as best you can, kind of paint a picture of what Alberta Premier Danielle Smith is trying to do and why it seems to be getting so much reaction.
Yes, I work in foreign affairs. Danielle Smith is the consummate diplomat, trying to avoid a war which Canada cannot win, which will hurt the United States, but I don't think at this point they care. And we can have all the assumptions about Donald Trump. I don't really talk about him. He's president of the United States. I neither like nor dislike him because it's not about Canada. But she is being realistic in terms of what Canada is promoting. Look, if Canada suddenly decides that after 10 years of trying to destroy the oil and gas sector, that it can somehow use the oil and gas sector as some kind of a wedge or a Trump card against Trump, then I think it's both hypocritical and it's wrong. And to take the position of belligerence, as I've seen from Justin Trudeau and as I've seen from Doug Ford here in the province of Ontario, is absolute insanity. Even Quebec's now starting to say, wait a minute, you're not going to cut off our electrical supplies or electricity supplies to the United States now, are you? Scott Moe's having second thoughts. Newfoundland is having second thoughts. It's not that Danielle Smith has basically said, I don't want to play ball. It's that the Team Canada approach has never been a Team Canada approach. This is a Justin Trudeau Liberal government that has spent billions of dollars on electric vehicles that the world will not like. And no mandate is going to force people into their vehicles. This is a government that has done its utmost to kill the oil and gas sector where it could, from blocking pipelines to preventing the shipping of that product, to attacking the industry, to putting taxes on the industry, to taxing consumers into oblivion because they want to serve a certain ideology and have bragging rights when they go to international forums so they can, swill back Perrier and eat canapes while the rest of us languish in poverty. The reality, I think, for us is that Danielle Smith is being a realist and she's playing chess, while Justin Trudeau and, yes, Doug Ford, the province of Ontario, who's so far the chair of the Council of the Federation, are playing checkers. And it's going to lead Canada to a very nasty situation, which we cannot recover. Also, by the way, it is pretext for them to do what they want. That's to basically hold government under emergency rules, which does scare me. But nothing surprises me now. A smart country like Canada would be there to say, what is the source of the problem? Is it in fact fentanyl being done by organized crime in Canada? And not just one crime. We have IRGC, we have Mexican cartels, we have South American cartels, we have Chinese cartels working together to create a lot of problems, not just in terms of drug instability, but also, human trafficking, drug trafficking. We are becoming an open border, and we have a significant problem with our immigration, like it or not. The open door policy, where we don't even know where 50,000 people are at any given time, could be in the United States. Have they done dastardly deeds? Doesn't really matter. The fact that they're there has threatened the United States, and we've let that happen because we didn't keep our guard up. This is on us. And Danielle Smith is simply pointing out that we need better diplomacy, not a means of belligerence in order to advance our position in advance of February the 1st.
Dan, we'll wrap up with you here in a few minutes, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party. Mr. Poilievre and his party have had the wind in their sails for quite some time. Public opinion for the most part has been on their side. Polling has been very positive towards them. If you're in the inner circle of Mr. Poilievre planning how he handles the next weeks and months ahead to maintain that momentum and to keep his messaging top of mind, as now it seems that Carney and Freeland and a lot of the Liberals are flip-flopping on their position, at least to get themselves elected. But again, if you're in Poilievre's inner circle, what's your advice to him to get him through the next few weeks and months to keep that momentum?
Well, I think he has the momentum. He's the man that they have to try to knock off, and they're going to try everything under the sun that they can. But what is shiny and new is usually quickly dissolved and forgotten by Canadians. And I think we saw the same thing. Kim Campbell was the best thing since sliced bread. John Turner was the best thing since sliced bread. Let me be very clear about my 40 years in experience directly in the Liberal Party. Half of that as a member of Parliament for the Liberal Party and responsible for Canadians abroad, Privy Councillor. The Liberals are done. They're finished. They're toast. And I would say to Canadians who are listening, get used to the idea of a new government with a fresh mandate, prepared to put Canadian priorities first, not someone else's agenda, and certainly not the agenda of grifters who have spent a significant amount of my money and your money and our grandchildren's money, borrowing money to be able to look after their friends, to reinforce messages that don't work for Canada. And I would say that when you undermine our democratic institutions, you undermine our ability to make ends meet. It doesn't matter who you present as a new Liberal leader. You are gone. And I am willing to say, I'll eat my hat if the Liberals form another government democratically and fairly.
Well, Dan, people could agree with you, disagree with you, or be somewhere in the middle. I can say, as someone who has spoken to you regularly over the last couple of years doing this show, so many of the things that you've prognosticated, predicted, talked about have come to fruition, have come to pass. So it'll be very interesting to see what you've just said currently if that does come to pass, indeed, if I were a betting man, which I'm not, I'd be putting my chips into the table on your side of things. But again, that's why we do this show each week, is to kind of look at what's going on, talk about it, and see where the winds are headed, and if the tide is coming in or out. Appreciate your time as always, Dan. Be well, take care of yourself the next few days, have a great weekend, and how about we get together and talk about a lot more next week?
Let's do it. Things are moving fast. Let's do it this time next week, Scott. Thank you.
Appreciate you, Dan. Thanks.